Hello, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural episode of A Better Life with George and Steve. We're here tonight recording this on our discussions with George and I regarding a podcast to talk about things we love, to talk about food, to talk about restaurants, to talk about, we love cigars, to talk about things that make our life better and make other people's lives better, too. It's not so much as it's an expensive life, but a life that's rich and full of experiences. And those happen at your home as well as they happen in restaurants and everywhere else. So my name is Steve, and I'm a fledgling home cook and am known for being a little bit of a pit master. I've been smoking things for years and also baking things, breads, cakes, things like that. But George, and I'll leave the floor to him for a minute. George is an accomplished chef. George has been around. So, George, just a little bit about your background.
Sure. Thank you, Steve. My name is George Cow. I am what I like to call a food nerd. I love everything about dining, about cooking, and feeding friends and family. I think I should start with my career in food. I started right out of college. I worked for a company called D'Artagnan in the city. And they're synonymous with foie gras, gibier, a lot of fancy meats, mushrooms, truffles, all things that you would associate with haute cuisine, French food. And at that time, I was enamored by a chef by the name of Joël Robuchon, and I just kind of jumped in that rabbit hole, and I wanted to know everything that could possibly be learned about New York City fine dining, and what a great place to start.
Sorry there, guys. I forgot to turn the music off from the very beginning, so we still hear it a little bit in the background. But it's what we call growing pains. So this is, like I said, our first episode. And funny enough, for things, it's our intent to start out audio, but we're hoping one day in the future to be, in maybe a short period of time, to have a video podcast. But we wanted to start audio, kind of get our sea legs and kind of move along into things are. And to start that off, George came over tonight and brought food, and he cooked an amazing, amazing dish. It was my intention to begin a brine for a pastrami that I'm going to smoke in a week after it brines for a week. But George bought food, and George cooked. And maybe, George, we decided to call it episode 1 is the dish, and maybe he wants to add pasta to it for the future. But it's definitely a keeper and something he came up with in the supermarket of all places. And that's what real chefs do. So maybe, George, you want to give a little bit of what you did tonight?
Sure. I get a lot of inspiration by just walking the aisles and checking what's, fresh, what looks good, and some things just kind of pop up in your mind. The weather here in New York has been dropping and dropping and dropping the last 2 weeks. We're waking up at around, 53 degrees now. So autumn is definitely up in our faces. And I thought maybe something like a hunter stew. I think the Italians call it cacciatore. And that was my inspiration. So I got some nice Bell & Evans chicken legs. I saw some delicious looking mushrooms. And off I went. Whole Foods has a fantastic, I think that it used to be a olive bar, but they have all these amazing, not just cured olives, but they have garlic confit. They have these delicious sweet brine peppers. And just one thing led to another. And I started assembling in my head as I picked and packed into my little cart. And it took, maybe 40 minutes or so? And
maybe, not even that much.
But it was an easy dish. Later, you can check our website or our Instagram site, and we'll definitely be posting that. And maybe you too will enjoy a nice cacciatore-style chicken stew in your near future.
Well, we don't have a website yet, but we're working on it. And so that probably won't be that far away, and I'll be glad to give you that info. George and I both have Instagram accounts, and we look at each other's when we cook often. One of the things, George and I both talk about food. We look at websites about restaurants. We visit many different restaurants. George is a real connoisseur. He likes to try everything on the menu. And it's funny because he cooked for a friend of mine over the weekend, and he made dumplings, and they were amazing. I'm not quite sure what was in them. Maybe George can go on to that, but he made fresh. He said, "Oh, I need to make them fresh." He couldn't do it ahead of time, so he made great dumplings. Also, we also made some other things together, but George took it to the full process. So it was really something. It wasn't just dumplings. It was the sauce. It was the broth, and all together made a perfect dish. And I think that's what makes his cooking amazing, is that it's totally complete, that the flavor is thought. And he said something to me about tonight's dish. What I found interesting is that what he learned, and maybe you can explain it better. Why should I repeat what you said?
Well, I think through everyone's cooking adventures, over the years, you're constantly learning, right? Like in anything. And if you have a lot of passion for something, you're always going to keep your mind open. And, every time I visit a chef's kitchen, or if we're cooking together, you're always trying to steal technique from these masters. And there was once a master from Japan, Michelin star chef. He mentioned, George, the final touch is aroma. Think about aroma. So, we have all these sensories in our palate. We have salt, we have sweetness, we have sourness and bitterness. And then, today we talk a lot about umami, but we also have to deal with temperature. We have to deal with texture, with a crunchy, soft, And then at the end of the day, aroma is the final aspect that I think a lot of great chefs focus on. And when you go to, fine dining restaurants and whatnot, it is always a eureka moment for me when I taste, one of their master dishes. And I know for sure the chef was thinking very, very diligently about aroma. And aroma can come from oils. It can come from botanicals. It can come from a lot of different things. But I think when you're cooking and you take it to, the next level, be sure to, consider aroma as one of the key elements to elevate your cooking.
Yeah, I always found there's something about a dish when it's placed in front of you and how it's placed in front of you. It's not only visual, but you also have a sense of smell to it, and you smell it and you can't wait to taste it. It's the smell that makes you can't wait to taste it. And even simple things have that. It doesn't have to be some complex palate like you managed to do tonight. But so anyway, to finish the story about, I spent the day before smoking meat. I smoked ribs. I smoked short ribs as well as pork ribs. I didn't think the pork ribs came out that well, so I apologize after I spent 5 hours making them. Some of them didn't make it to the table, but some did. And we had the pleasure, and George explained to you a little bit better about that, a pleasure of someone that was really with us, that was a wine connoisseur, and she brought out wines and I don't really drink. Although I love wine, I don't really drink. She brought out amazing wines that I don't think was ever contemplated to go with pork ribs and barbecue. That's for sure. So, George, do you know a little more about the wine? You can maybe give us a background on it.
Yeah, I think the host was more than generous to open up the cellar, and we first toasted the evening with a bottle of Krug. How can you not be in a jovial mood right off the bat? And
those of you who don't know, Krug is one of the real fine champagnes that it's not economical in any sense of the imagination, and none of these wines are, but it really, really was just a light way to start the night, and it was amazing. But go ahead.
Exactly. And then all of a sudden, I see in front of us a 78 Antinori Tignanello, and wow. And I also am not a very big wine drinker, but I have worked in the beverage sector with Japanese sakes, shochus, and craft beers. And through my travels, I've run into a few wine sommeliers, and these are some of the great wines that everyone talks about. So that 78 Antinori, there was a 66 second growth Lafite, and there was another 82 bottle of Bordeaux. And so we got to drink some very rare, but also, to my surprise, they were alive. They were so vibrant. They had so much character to them, and it was really a night to really remember.
It was quite a wine night. I mean, there were, like I said, I don't really drink. There were moments that full sentences became moderately a moderate challenge on me, and everyone couldn't believe it, but it did happen. But those moments passed quickly because there wasn't that much alcohol involved. But the wines had flavor and body, and everything about it was an experience that should not be missed. Of course, the night was capped off with after dinner wine. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, that was I believe a 75 Barzac, a delicious Sauterne. It had the color of a ruby port. It was tremendously, aged. I mean, 75. We're talking 25 plus 23, 48-year-old Sauterne. It was incredible.
And my friend next to me, Larry, was sitting at the table, and people were drinking their Sauterne, and they weren't finishing it. And he was like, "Are you going to finish that?" That's how good it was. It was an amazing wine. And we hope to talk to you about other wines over the course of this event. It really was special. So it was a special night, and we thank her for that. And, part of the plan on Friday certainly was her and mine plan. And the things I've talked about, George, is to start cooking more at parties, to start doing things and really putting recipes together and starting the thought process. George and I have gone around about doing cooking for events. I'm going to wash dishes, but George is really going to take the run. I'm kind of the bullwhip of the whole situation. I like to push forward a little bit, but
I think we could take maybe one step back and kind of explain how we actually met.
Sure.
We both love cigars. We met at a cigar lounge in Mamaroneck, Doc James Cigar Lounge. And, little by little, start talking. And, I think someone had mentioned that you love smoking meats. And then another day went by and someone said that you had baked bread. And then we happened to now sit next to each other and we started chit-chatting. And you showed me a picture of this beautiful, beautiful sourdough. And I recognized, the shape and the color and how, the lattice and all that. And I think I mentioned, is that Poilâne sourdough? And you said, exactly. Right. And I think that was one of those moments where we kind of looked at each other like, oh, we are on the same page. We appreciate some of the great things about cooking, which is, never take shortcuts. I understand Poilâne's sourdough is no joke, no easy feat. And yeah, do you remember that day, Steve?
I do remember that day, and it's funny because I was so shocked that you knew that was a Poilâne. Poilâne is an interesting story, and so Poilâne's, I want to say grandfather, not father, when he came to Paris, everybody made baguettes. Everybody made baguettes because that's when you think of French bread, you think of baguettes. Well, he knew he couldn't compete, so he started making sourdough bread using organic, very best flours, grinds of flours, the best yeasts that are available in Paris. And because it was sourdough, it had a longer shelf life. And because it had a longer shelf life, people that were poor, working class people, could afford to buy the bread, and it would last longer than a baguette lasts a day. A sourdough, all right, and for those of you who are not familiar, sourdough is done with a starter that's used basically flour and water, and the bacteria of it works like it's a starter, and it works like yeast, kind of, sort of. It is a living thing like yeast is, but it's not packaged like that. You basically grow it in a jar. It takes a couple weeks to get it mature, and then you have to feed it every day for the rest of your life. I've been in restaurants that have a 55-gallon drum full of starter because they bake their bread every day. And that's how they got started. They made their name on organic sourdough bread selling to common people. And then it took off because their bread is round in France when most others are long and thin. So that was, and I had heard about it, and I'm a big advocate of Masterclass, and I don't know if you guys are all familiar with it. Masterclass is like an app for your phone or an app for your Apple TV. I have both, and I downloaded it because I wanted to learn how to smoke meat, and I had bought a smoker, and I had a lot of failed attempts. In fact, I would say it took me 2 years to be able to get to where I needed to be and when smoking meat. 2 years to get my ribs, as I would say, perfect, because people told me they were. And that I started by watching a masterclass on Aaron Franklin, who Franklin's Barbecue in Texas is the one that's well known. And he taught me all good habits. He taught me about trying methods. And if you fail, you write down everything you do and then you change. And that's what it was. It was a work in progress. Well, out of the clear blue sky, the Poulin, one of the Poulin descendants, the daughter or granddaughter, and I can't think of her name off the top of my head. She did a masterclass. She went through flours. She went through cooking. She went through how it's formed. There are classes on forming it, on water, on humidity, on everything you had to do when it comes to bread. And I just followed her instructions. And yes, it is not easy. And it takes a long time. And yes, it's more art than baking. Just like, as George would say, cooking is more art than eating. So, and that's how I learned how to do it. And it was an amazing moment that my bread moved to the next level, that the crust was crispy, that you wanted to buy the best butter. Of course, I started making my own, but the best butter you could get, and bread and butter and cheese. And then you start to understand how that is a meal upon itself, like they think about it in France.
Yeah, bread, I would say, is religion, if you will, in France. Even the government understands that it should be a right for every citizen in France. And I believe they capped a price ceiling on a baguette. It cannot be over €2 in Paris to charge. So everyone is working on a deficit in terms of, but it's pride. Like when you go to Tokyo and you have sushi, every restaurant, every sushi chef will have tuna, and that could be a price loser for them because it's the pride behind a proper establishment to have certain things every day. And so I think bread, when I found out that they can't charge over €2, that kind of, made me smile, and it kind of made my heart a little warmer because that is the life of, a French or Parisian. So to understand that, and for, what Steve mentioned, the poor not having the ability to even afford a baguette because it went bad so quickly, this sourdough, round, mysterious, almost drum-like, baked good became such a hit that I think the world really took notice. And so when we saw the Poilâne sourdough, and I think conversations kind of just flowed ever since that conversation.
I agree. And that's my memory anyway. And also there's something else I make, Italian dessert called Torrone. And George,
I have yet to have that.
So on our next episode, we'll see if we can have some of that to sample while we're going here. But I don't know if do you want to give a little more information about how'd you make your meal tonight, or you want to move on to another subject?
Simple cacciatore, vision, but that olive bar at Whole Foods has these, again, the garlic confit, which I think is, divine. It's sweeter. It has elements of, this savoriness and sweetness that really works well with chicken and some herbs. The peppadew peppers really give it a life. And then just basic, I like to call it the backbone of any stew. You got to use some onions. I think I threw in some pancetta, some mushrooms. It wasn't a mirepoix tonight, but I think we just had enough elements there to stew or braise the chicken legs with some chicken stock. And those elements, those aromatic elements at the end, throwing in, I believe it was sage, thyme, and rosemary with those garlic confit, and then the sweet sourness of those pickled peppadews really just took it to a different. I had to think about viscosity. So I saw some garbanzo beans, and I know that legumes will give you a little bit of starchiness. So that lent to a nice thicker broth. No flour was added. But yeah, all in all, I think that was a hit.
I spent a year in Italy, and I always remember that most of the dishes that were overwhelming were ones that had the simplest ingredients. And that's really an Italian cook way, is you take simple things, you combine them perfectly. They need to be fresh. I seem to remember, cooking with my mother, and there was never canned garlic. There was never anything. Everything had to be fresh. It's just the way it was. And that makes a difference. And George came in with a bag of stuff, threw it in a pot. Next thing you know, the whole house smelled great. And it was an amazing dish. And we're going to put that recipe on, right?
Yeah.
Very,
very easy.
Very easy. We're going to put that recipe on the episode 1 recipe. We're going to put that on the website. I'm not quite sure what the website is, so it'll be on. I'll add it to the end of the podcast. What would you like to talk about next, George? Is there anything in particular?
Let's see. Well, after any great meal, usually you and I do light up and smoke a delicious cigar.
Sure.
So something like this, I think I'd probably go with a Dominican cigar, a little bit more flavorful, not as harsh or heavy on the palate. And when Dominicans are considered, I think there's 2 brands that come to mind. One is Fuente and one is Davidoff. Right. What do you think?
Well, I'm not a big Fuente guy. I am certainly a big Davidoff guy. I remember meeting the master blender years ago, whose name also escapes me at the moment.
Was it Henke?
Yeah, Henke. Henke and
Kleiner,
thank
right?
you. Yeah, Henke Kleiner. And so I met him in an outing, and he was there, and he sat down with me and explained to me everything he did, and how important it was to him, how things aged, how things were grown. It really was quite amazing the way Henke went at his craft, the top of his game. And his son was living in his footsteps. And when I asked him his favorite cigar, it was an unusual choice. It was the Davidoff Colorado Clara, which is a different leaf for the wrapper on the cigar. It's a finer. It's got more flavor. And the size was a short Perfecto, which is a very small cigar. But it's not small in price anymore because cigars have gone up ridiculously, like everything else in our world. But it is, to me, one of the better smokes in there. Sometimes I have the specialty, but the Colorado Clara is far, for me, one of my favorite. I also really like the late hour, the Winston Churchill late hour. I always find that's a great cigar, but it's a longer cigar. It's a longer and a stronger profile too. But it's a good cigar, especially after a meal. Now, this meal wasn't heavy, so a stronger cigar may kill it. But
yeah, I think that Colorado Clara would be perfect. I think for after a nice chicken stew. And I believe it was Kellner, not Kleiner. My mistake.
Yes, but you're right.
As companies, come and go, they're one of the most consistent. They're one of the most, I think, in terms of QC, the most adamant with what they put out. Someone told me you need to be rolling cigars for over 10 years before you get to roll a Davidoff. You need that on your resume to, make it to the big leagues of cigars. But yeah, it's a great line that they have. I think I completely agree with you. Colorado Clara maybe not be my favorite, but I do love the Millennium, and then the late hour. I think are my 2 go-tos when it comes to Davidoffs.
Is Millennium the one that makes the what's the long thin one? Why does the name escape me for a minute? Lancero. What is the?
I think
is it Millennium or is it not? I know there was a special edition Lancero. which was like a $45 cigar, but it lasted long, and it was just an amazing profile.
I don't think Davidoff has a standard all-year Lancero, but yes, I think 2-3 times a year they come out with limited editions, and I think this year in 2023 there was a Lancero that came out. I think it could be.
There is,
yeah,
there
right?
was a Lancero. I was knee deep in it. It really was good. I tried to buy a box online, and it was a ridiculous amount of money, so I had to pass. So it's one every once in a while now. So we've I don't know how long we're going to go. We never discussed that, and now we're in the middle of it. So and something came to mind that may be a great conversation for our first episode. And I would like to ask George if he can remember the best meal he ever ate.
Wow.
The best. It could be at a restaurant. It could be at a party. It could be anywhere. If you talk about, it could be simple. It doesn't have to be complex. The meal that you feel the most memorable.
I think a lot of people get this question. It's an easy question to ask, but such a hard decision to make. And best in what circumstance? What kind of setting? What kind of circumstance were you in to get that best distinction? Well, one that immediately pops to mind, and I'm gonna say there's multiple bests, but one that comes to mind was after I finished a summer internship in Tokyo. My father flew in, and I think like any proud father wanted to celebrate, and he took me to a restaurant in Roppongi, Tokyo. It's called Selina, and they specialize in shabu-shabu. Shabu-shabu and also teppanyaki, which I think in the States we call it like hibachi, but the proper word is teppanyaki, and the other cuisine that they specialize in is shabu-shabu. And those who don't know what shabu-shabu is, you sit on a table, there's a heat source, and there's a rolling pot of broth, and you gently dip sliced Japanese beef in it for maybe 1 or 2 seconds, and then you dip it in the sauce, and you're really showcasing the tremendous quality of Japanese Wagyu beef. And for those also, if you've never had true 100% Wagyu beef, it really does melt in your mouth. And this was one of those moments. I remember I was, I think, 21 or 22. I had never had the highest grade Kobe beef. And it sounds a little silly, but the moment I put it in my mouth, it did melt in my mouth. And I think a tear came out of my eye. It was so memorable and so delicious that I would have to say that is my most memorable and best meal I've ever had.
Really? So I have to say my most memorable meal was at a birthday party of a gentleman. I want to say, I'm not sure if it was the husband or the wife. I want to say it was the wife. The year before, I think the husband turned 80. And we went to Per Se, and it was an amazing meal with wine pairings. But it wasn't as good as when the wife turned 80. We had a 12-course meal at 11 Madison in the day, and that was prior to their changeover to vegan in the former setup at 11 Madison. We had a private room. We had our private chef. Every course was paired with a wine. The dessert courses went on forever. And you had to basically, didn't matter what you liked. Didn't matter if you liked to drink, because I am not really a drinker, like I've mentioned before. And I drank every wine on every course. I mean, the courses weren't big, but there were many of them, and they were filling, and they were rich, and they were art. And I remember that meal like yesterday. And I can't even tell you other than the cream. I remember the oysters because I never ate oysters before because I don't like oysters. And I loved them. They were fried in then some kind of cream sauce. And there may have been 2. I mean, it wasn't a big dish, but it was amazing. And that night was was basically crafted, the environment, the food, the alcohol, the seating, the table, the kitchen. You had your own kitchen. The chef worked in a kitchen that you could watch him cook. Was crafted in every moment. And that, I would say, without a doubt, is one of the great meals that I've had in my life. Having said that, I'm a WoHop guy. The first time I went to WoHop, I was working in down by the courthouse downtown. And some of you that are not familiar with WoHop, it's a very well-known Chinese restaurant that you go down these flight of stairs. And if any of you saw the last episode of Mrs. Maisel, she's in there with the gentleman that plays, I just drew a blank, the comedian from the show. Ugh, I can't believe I can't remember his name. And she's in there, and they're in WoHop. And I mean, WoHop is a treat. I mean, you can't understand if you don't speak Chinese, you're not going to be able to talk to anybody. And one of my big memories there is the tic-tac-toe chicken across the street. You ever see him, George?
No.
So across the street, there used to be the tic-tac-toe chicken. You paid $1, and you played tic-tac-toe against the chicken. And no matter what you did, you lost. He either tied you or beat you every time. The chicken never lost. Of course, sooner or later he passed the chicken. But the tic-tac-toe chicken, the guy used to sit there all day and collect dollars. All day. It was funny. But WoHop, they also have an upstairs too, but Lenny Bruce, I'm sorry. So the Luke, I can't think of his last name, plays Lenny Bruce. And Lenny Bruce is a character woven through Mrs. Maisel, the entire set of episodes, and it kind of makes it real a little bit. And it's really, really, really one of my favorite places to go, WoHop. Have you been there?
I actually have never been there.
Yeah, we got to go.
Yeah.
It's great. So we're 37, 38 minutes in. You want to end it here for now, or do you want something else you want to cover?
Just, I think everyone's probably getting a little idea of, the format of how we want to go about things, but it's really a free flow of ideas and of things that we want to talk about and kind of brush up on our passions. I know, Steve, you're a big movie guy.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of film that you've already, collected and watched, you have so many interesting hobbies. Like you're an astronomer. You love, your collection of telescopes is insane.
You only saw part of them. There's a whole bunch of more in the other room.
and then lately, in the past few weeks, you've become this Victrola collector, and I see these massive units in your apartment, and it's just really, really interesting. On top of that, I think, all the stories you've told me, all the different hats you've worn throughout your career and this and that. And it's kind of, where I think why we get along so well. I think I too have, I hop around on different passions, but, food, and I think golf and tennis have really stuck around. And I'm sure we'll talk about that, in future episodes as well.
Strangely enough, George and I has never played golf together. Maybe that is because I've only played a few times this year, but I played yesterday and I realized I need to play more. Well, everybody realizes they need to play more, but I mean, the enjoyment of it was great, relaxing, because when you play golf, you really can't think of anything else. If you're thinking of something else, your ball's in the woods.
That is 100% true.
100% true.
I can't even smoke a cigar because I'm so in my mind when I'm playing golf.
Well, I can smoke a cigar. So, but I hit in the woods a lot anyway. So, but there are a lot of things, and to talk about some of I have 4 antique phonographs. 2 are by Edison, one with an external horn, one with an internal horn. One's from 1903, 1905. The other one's a little bit later, maybe 6 or 7. I have 2 Victrolas made by Victor long before the dog was listening to the RCA dog was listening to the horn. One's from 1911, the other one's from 1903. They came with an amazing collection of Enrico Caruso opera that I have been listening to and blows my mind. Today, I was lucky enough to get some original recordings of Louis Armstrong, some original recordings of Billie Holiday, which we listened to a little bit tonight. And there's something about them that take me back in time. And I don't know why, but when you play it, I mean, the music is arranged differently. It sounds differently. It's recorded differently. You know, things were done at one take. Everybody played together. You know, that doesn't happen anymore. And there's some spontaneity that's down on that vinyl. There's something that makes it different than what we're used to today. You'd like to say a simpler time, but you know what? People say that all the time. There was never a simple time. Everything was difficult. People were starving. People were in a depression. People were things, you know. There's always been difficult times. There's always been difficult times, you know. Just like, you know, when you read the beginning of Tale of Two Cities and that whole first paragraph, the best of time, worst of times, and it's true. And then the last line is much like the times they are right now, because there's always turbulent times, and there are turbulent times now. People don't get along. They all hate each other. They hate people because they believe something different. You know, when America was started, and I don't want to get off on a tangent here, George, stop.
This could be a very slippery slope.
Yeah, well, when America was started, it was made by people who weren't allowed to live anywhere else for their beliefs. And America is a country where beliefs are free. Thought is free. Speech is free. And though tolerance has never been our middle name, we're certainly smart enough that we have to learn to be able to tolerate other points of view. And I'm going to end that there, because I can go on for that a little while. That two people can't sit in the room. I mean, I remember someone showing me on a dating site where people put in their dating profile, people would put their political views and say, if you don't believe me, but you don't agree with me, don't bother answering. And I was like, frankly, I've been recently divorced a few years ago, and I went on one of the dating apps, and a woman sent me a 10-question questionnaire about my political beliefs. And if I didn't answer every one question, she didn't want to go out with me. And I sent it back to her and said, you know why you're not married or don't have a boyfriend? It's because you make people fill out a 10-question questionnaire. I guess in today's world, love has nothing to do with it. But anyway, I think we're going to end it there.
Sounds good.
Anything else? So I hope we're going to hear from you again. I hope people are give us some feedback if we ever get our website up, and we will. You know, George knows me. I'm going to do that tonight before I go to bed. All of a sudden, there'll be a website, a web page, and it'll all be done. And then hopefully we'll get some comments from you all, and we look forward to next week, you think?
Sure.
Next week, we're going to take another crack at this. Tonight I'm a lawyer by trade. I've argued at the Second Circuit Court of Appeals without a scrap of paper in my hand. I could do things off the top of my head. It's just my nature. I don't like to write out and take notes. I think George is a little bit more regimentary in that shape. But tonight was definitely the things we wanted to talk about, and hopefully that'll be our mantra, that we're going to not only talk about things we want to talk about, but things you want us to talk about and you want us to hear. So thank you all for listening. We appreciate your time. We know it's valuable.
Absolutely. Thank you for everyone who's listening. And we definitely would love some feedback and perhaps some talking points if you want us to dabble with, certain topics. We're very open to that as well. I think one of the elements that we wanted to add on in the future was maybe like a 5-minute food assembly workshop, or we'll talk a little bit more about, themed cuisine. And then I think every week we'll have another either theme or a guest speaker come on, and we'll talk about whether, something about their craft or a particular, hobby that we all share together, and we'll go from there.
Right. And that's one of the things I wanted to mention before we go. We're looking to bring on guests, and anything you want to hear about, please let us know. I appreciate it. And good night from us.
Yes. Good night.
Have a good time. Bye.